I'd like to welcome both Cameron and Jamie back up, if you guys would sit up here. And we'll just take questions by using the microphone. So hold your hand up, and we can bring the microphone to you. And if you could, please keep your questions concise, because we are already running a bit late. So, you know, if you go longer than a minute, I'm going to have Arlen take the microphone away from you.
Speak loud, I think. When will that modeling thing that you were just showing be for all of the coasts?
Yes, good question. That model, the Boston Harbor flood risk model, is going to be publicly available, the results for that. And that's going to be done by the end of the year. It has available results along the entire coastline, but it doesn't have the upland grid everywhere. Okay, so there's information that will be available that shows where it's going to be available, and I have a fact sheet that will show that, but it can be extended. In some communities, Cambridge for one, John Bolduc will be giving a talk later this afternoon, they're using those results to start to look at things. There's a couple South Shore communities that are doing it, and it's not excessively costly to be on board. It's something that's doable because Mass DOT and Federal Highway Administration have kind of split the bill for the major development of it.
Thank you. The three of you sort of alluded to this, which is that storms come and the maps look really good, but then the storms go away. And so one of the things I struggle with is I see the map and I think it's always going to be wet. And do your models ever decide how long it's likely that we'll have water in downtown Boston, or what the long-term consequences of a short order flood might be?
Well, because the model's dynamic, it automatically has that. So there's a number of things you can look at, right? We were looking at just the Monte Carlo results there, kind of the flooding risk profile, but you can look at individual events too. I mean, there's 5,000 storms that we simulate. So you could look at an individual event and see how long it takes to recede, for example, from a certain area. So the water goes in and then it comes back out, and we can start to look at volume and time of inundation. All that information is something that can come out of that model.
But to predict it in real time is virtually impossible, because it'll be a function of so many things, like the size of the storm, the angle of the wind, whether the wind spins, veers or backs 2 hours quicker than you forecast. And since we can't forecast those things precisely 2 days in advance, you can't say it's going to be 6 hours versus 5 hours. That's a level of detail that the people who focus on that level of detail are missing the uncertainty, the inability to forecast hurricanes very, very well. And in this type of analysis, where you're doing your runs outside of the time constraints of a storm, yeah, you can back out probabilities of different timing, what's the probability of 6 hours versus the probability of 8 hours, and so on and so forth. But to do it in real time is almost impossible.
Jamie, your evacuation plans for communities are based on your worst case modeling. How do you handle when it's something less than a 100-year storm or something less than the worst case, and that happens fairly frequently, and the communities do an extensive evacuation that they feel is unnecessary?
Yeah, you tend to be a very unpopular person very quickly. But I'd much rather have someone yell at me, have the ability, the breath in their lungs to yell at me, than the alternative.
Do you ever see that they don't, that they start to get lax and don't follow it?
You do and you don't. For example, there was some pushback in this part of the country when we released the worst case analysis up here, that it was some crazy nut scientist going overboard, until Sandy came, and all of a sudden that rhetoric went away. So it tends to be a function of whether or not a community has been hit. Because usually what happens, for example, you go to Tampa or somewhere that hasn't been hit in a long time, and they think, oh, there's another crazy government scientist. But if you go to New Orleans, you don't get that perspective. So it really is a function of whether or not a community has been hit, and usually the communities that have been hit are very quick to adopt and appreciate the worst case analysis.
I think I can speak up. I'm not a modeler, but I am a customer of modelers, mostly on transport systems, wastewater transport systems. Seems to me there are a few limitations that we're overcoming with the models. One is the algorithms for the hydrodynamics that's occurring. You mentioned that we're improving upon that. Another is the just the physical characterization, the characterization of our physical systems, and you're tightening up the grids and you're putting in a lot more data. But the other one that has bothered me is calibration. How important is calibrating a huge set of different storm conditions combined with other things that you keep talking about? There's so many different things that happen all at the same time, wind and precipitation and tides and surge and all that. Are we improving on how much we can how many events we can calibrate, and how important is that? Maybe it's not all that important because, as you said, Jamie, we can't predict exactly what's going to happen anyway.
I would say our ability to calibrate and validate models has drastically improved over the last 5 or 6 years, courtesy of the USGS pressure sensors, which are these pressure sensors that are deployed in advance, so they're not in situ. They're deployed where they need to be based off the storm. And they not only give you better data, but they give you temporal. And so that allows you to figure out from a modeling perspective if you're getting it right for the right reasons. You know, models can get the right answer, but for the totally wrong reason, dumb luck or whatever. And so if you parade forward with the assumption that your model is good, then that is going to eventually get you. But these new data sets, from our perspective, are really allowing more robust validation.
I'd just like to add, I also am not a modeler, but those calibration events have all occurred in the past, and we're looking at a future that's different. And so just beware that we're calibrating on something that is not necessarily an analog for the future. And frankly, it makes it a very challenging problem.
All right, I think we're going to have to end the panel session with that brief set of questions. But I want to thank all of our speakers from this morning. They were a great set of talks.